Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Kim speaking. Many of you know me. I'm a family engagement specialist on the Kaleidoscope team. And today we have a webinar on advocacy and KPL, engaging your community to make meaningful change. We have with us our guest speaker today, Camille Wilson, for this special topic. It's a little bit different than the other ones, and we're really excited to have it. Hopefully it will be useful to all of you. I'll let Camille introduce herself.
Hi all, this is Camille. I've spoken with some of you before, but I am the FFN graduate intern here with the FFN team at CCR and have been working on the KPL program for a couple months now and am studying policy. So have gotten some work in tips and tricks for doing advocacy, and I'm excited to share some ideas for the KPL program.
Awesome. So this is really casual. If you have questions throughout, feel free to type in the chat box or also click the little hand to raise your hand and we can unmute you to speak. And we will go ahead and start.
All right, thank you, Kim. So we're going to head back to just covering a few objectives for what we're going to go over this afternoon. Just touching base and exploring what advocacy means, learning how to describe your cause as a facilitator, a parent, a program manager, and then looking into the different types of advocacy. And finally, we're going to go over some new ways to bring advocacy into your organizations and KPL groups. So first, we wanted to ground the webinar really in why this conversation is so important. There's a fabulous quote that Kim sent me last week from Alice Walker, who's a novelist and an activist here in the United States, who wrote this comment: the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And as we talk further today, you'll see a lot of how so much of the advocacy conversation starts with realizing that you have so much power in the roles that you play, the services that you provide to your community, to your family members, and how do we use that power that we already have to make really big change. I love this picture. I think I've seen it a few times in classrooms, but it really is how we see ourselves and view our power is the biggest starting point for making really lasting change. A couple of things to note: that your experiences are really valuable to the advocacy process, and that whether it's elected officials or communities you serve, your experience can be used to improve the world around you. You have the best personal experience of when something is or isn't working. You can speak to those experiences. You likely have ideas for how to make things better with your lived experience. And as individuals who work with families and communities, you have the long-term connection to these kiddos and families and are the voices that we want to be making change. To start off, we would love to hear from several of you to hear what advocacy means. I think it can be kind of a big, weird word. So would love if you could raise your hand or type in the chat box to hear what your ideas of advocacy are.
And if you'd like to speak, just let us know on the chat box and we can unmute you. So it looks like someone has said advocacy is speaking up about things that you believe in. Mm-hmm. It looks like Wailing, we're going to unmute you. Looks like you raised your hand. Can you hear us, Wailing? Hello? Wailing, we can't hear you if you're trying to speak. If you do have something to contribute, you can try typing in the chat box, maybe. The technology is not quite lined up right now. Okay, well, it looks like someone else has said that advocacy is an opportunity to share what is important to you, which is very true, and also to make your voice be heard. These are all very, very true. All right, anyone else? Someone else has said that it's promoting an idea and used to educate and move something forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the education component is very, very important.
Fabulous. Well, we're going to keep going. If something pops into your mind, feel free to share it in the chat box. Yes, I think all of these answers are fabulous. And in so many other circles, when we hear the word advocacy, people go to, does that mean I have to be in a court system advocating on behalf of someone or working, lobbying in government circles? And I think those ideas can be really scary because in our normal day-to-day activities, those seem like really big challenges. And you all hit the nail right on the head to say that advocacy is all about sharing what matters to you, the changes you want to see, and making your voice heard. So awesome. I think we can all go home now. I want to move to a next piece here of a dictionary definition of what advocacy means. And we see here in good old Webster's dictionary that it's the process or act of supporting a cause or proposal. And this really brings it down to our surface level view that every one of us has a cause, and especially with KPL, we're all invested in the well-being of children and communities. So that part is already done we're already advocates. We have our cause, and it doesn't need to be scary to speak up about our children and communities. Those things come naturally to those of us who are invested in KPL. And now we just get to label it as advocacy and work with our families and communities to see it as advocacy as well. It's kind of a reframe that can be really powerful. Again, reclaiming that power. My hope is at the end of our webinar today that you feel comfortable going out into your communities and the families you serve and working to help people understand that advocacy doesn't need to be scary. So that's our hope for today, is that we can walk away going, this isn't scary, and I have some real tips for how to make change in my community. So first, we're going to jump into how do we name our cause. I think from a big umbrella level view, we care about our children and families, but what does that mean, and how do we work with families to understand a quick and easy way to talk about their causes? Families and facilitators alike have goals for what they want in their communities, and they should be setting the vision for what those changes should look like. I think this process is really strengths-based. We're not talking about things that aren't working well in communities. We're saying the visions that we have and building off of the strengths in our families and communities. You don't need outside experts to name what you want for your children, whether that's health and healthy social circles, good school systems, but learning how to frame our cause in terms of what do you want for your children and what do you want for your communities. Again, we're going to move over to the chat box because I'd love to hear ways that these conversations are already happening in groups. I know I've visited a couple of groups, and clearly Kim and Jennifer spend time visiting our Washington affiliate groups. But how are ways that these conversations come up? Are parents talking about their causes already? Or are these questions that you've found success asking as a facilitator? Just love to hear some of your feedback.
And again, feel free to chat in the box, type it in, or we can unmute you. Let us know if you'd like to speak. We'll just give everyone a moment to reflect and contribute their thoughts. And this could be something that you personally want, or that you've heard caregivers in your group wanting, or maybe something that's aligned with your agency's mission, any of those.
So we have a comment from Jennifer saying that she's heard lots of conversations around school readiness and what that means. It's a great example. I think those are things that parents and caregivers are already talking about in groups and are great starting points for understanding what matters to families, what these causes are. Another comment from Fran saying, identify who might be able to talk to others about what is of concern for their families. That's a great one.
I know lately in groups I've visited in the past few weeks, a lot of caregivers have been voicing that they want more resources that are more bilingual for their kids. And so that's why they go to the bilingual KPLs, but more early learning materials and events for them to attend so that they can raise their kids bilingually. That's been very vocal lately in many of my visits.
Yeah. Fran also said paying and finding quality childcare is another cause that families are bringing up. Tanya is saying we have lots of informal conversations with participants individually based on their desires and needs. Which, yes, I think that's exactly what KP&L is having families and caregivers enter the doors and be able to talk and be in community with one another. And these conversations are naturally happening. These aren't seminars where you're having to, what is your cause? People know what they want to see for their families. Christina is saying, we want to build a community at our site, connect families with different resources available. Absolutely. And that is a great segue into our next piece, which I'd love to start talking about different ways that we see advocacy show up. So the conversations are already happening. What are the different ways that people are engaging? And service, this first one, identifying a need and meeting it. This is exactly what families are already doing. When we say we want strong networks and strong communities, families are doing that. They're showing up and being with one another, with neighbors, sharing resources and information. That is advocacy. I think serving one another often gets underlooked when we think of advocacy as speaking with a megaphone, and it's not. It can be serving one another and making the change that you want to see in your community. It could be something big, like starting a community-based program. And for our program supervisors who are in the webinar, I think this is something that we'd love to touch on is the way that you run your organization and are connecting with your facilitators and your families. You're meeting a community need. That's advocacy. When families show up and are supporting their neighbors, word of mouth, checking in with one another, building community, that's supporting your neighbors and advocating for the change you want to see. And being a caregiver, like that is the biggest way that you're making change in your world, is by investing in the kiddos and families that you're caring for. These are all elements that, again, reclaiming that power. I think if you're in a role where you're working directly with caregivers, helping them to see the work they're already doing is advocacy. They're making change by serving their kiddos, their families, and their community. Fabulous. The next piece, in addition to service, I'd love to look at education. So it looks like someone mentioned that earlier about Fran's comment, using education to move an idea forward. That's exactly advocacy, raising awareness about your cause. And I really want to separate this idea again from the megaphone idea of advocacy, that this is word of mouth conversations between parents, experiences that you've had helping one another navigate school systems, navigate social service networks. That's already happening in your KP&L groups. That's advocacy. And for our facilitators and program managers or program supervisors, talking about KP&L with partner organizations or funders or other community organizations that you work with in your community, anytime you're talking about the value of family and what KP&L brings, that's a component of advocacy as well. I think both of these slides, if anything, should encourage you that advocacy is already happening in KP&L groups and in your organizations, which is amazing. When we share information, we're really investing in that community change. So then enter this next piece, which is this speaking up. So this is the megaphone view I was talking about a few moments ago, how using your voice outside of your immediate circle. And I think this probably is where the scary part of advocacy comes in. I know, as I have never been one who enjoys public speaking, and so the idea of going and talking in front of a large group of people is totally scary. So kind of unpacking the different components of how do we engage in speaking up, and are there ways to make it easier, both for yourself and for families, to get everybody engaged in this process. It's much less scary when we're acting together. And I think that KP&L is a great platform for families already connecting and in community. If we can work together, it's so much easier to speak up and speak out. And in addition to being together, I think having someone go before you and be really familiar with the process can be helpful. This is a really great way for facilitators and program supervisors to get involved with someone who has institutional power, whether that's your title in your organization, or the ability in your schedule to go to different community events and forums. And when you can speak to those experiences, it makes it less scary for individuals who may have never spoken up in a public setting before. And so looking at a couple examples I mentioned here, I mean, there's tons of ways to get involved, but school boards in your community, going to meetings, like town hall events, city council events, or even talking to your elected officials. There's so many different ways that this looks like in community. And as KPL really being a portal into community resources, I think there's a really unique opportunity for KPL facilitators and for program supervisors to change the relationship between people and government and not make it such a big divide, but to really bring those two bodies under one roof, because that's what government is supposed to be there for, is to help support communities. So those are the three main categories of advocacy. And we want to pause one more time just to check in with, now that we've kind of talked through those three different umbrellas. So again, the education, service, and then speaking up. Are there other ways that you've seen advocacy show up in your organizations or in your KPL groups that you'd share with us? And as you're thinking of ideas, we're curious to hear from individuals who are in different roles. So if you are a facilitator, if you've seen conversations happen, if you've seen caregivers go to any events, or if you're a program coordinator, seeing different sites that you visit, we'd just love to hear different examples. And I'm happy to give some of that, gets the ball rolling. A couple that I found and have chatted with people about were, if you've ever met with your child's teacher about an issue, that's a really fabulous way to engage in change. That's speaking up. Talking at a local gathering about an issue that you care about. I loved this example. Talking to a cashier when an item wasn't ringing up correctly. I think learning to see something and speak up about it can be something as little as a grocery store encounter, and a great way to build confidence that we all can be advocates. I see a couple comments coming in here. So Tanya is saying that we have had participants write letters of support, sharing how their participation has benefited them and shared them at auction with our different funders. That's great. Jennifer is saying trainings focused on advocacy, communication requests to reach out to local representatives. Again, a great one. And then Tamara is saying, I am part of a human service advocacy group as well as I advocate individually. Fabulous. And that's absolutely what we were talking about, is it's so much easier to bring people into the advocacy process when there's someone who's gone before them and can talk through some different opportunities or different, messaging or spiels that you've used in the past. You're a great advocate for advocates. Let's see, Jana's saying, same here, training for advocacy with staff. That's fabulous. And yes, setting the pavement down so that people can join with you. That's awesome. Well, thank you for all of your responses.
Looks like we have one more popping in. Christina has said, we bring different organizations to talk to parents about different things. A family coordinator from the school district, CMAR, and so on.
Bring people into groups. Yeah, and that's a great way to close that divide too, of whether it's social services or government outside of groups, bringing them into your groups. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, some ways to invite people to come visit your groups, but that's a great example. Thanks, Christina. Let's move on to talk about some of these different ways to bring new opportunities into your groups and organizations. We want to touch first on a couple of challenges, and of course this is not the fun part of talking about any new skill, is the things that you want to be aware of. But I think to be really successful at building opportunities for your families and for your facilitators to engage in advocacy, you want to be aware of things that might be challenging. One being a lack of time. I think if it's not a process that you're really familiar with, and it's something that you want to learn more about, it takes time, and so many of our families are pressed with the stresses of life and work, etc. So finding time, the more time you can save your families and facilitators, the more likely they are to be able to engage in advocacy opportunities. lack of knowledge about the issues. This has nothing to do with lived experience or your own expertise. This has to do with just understanding the process. I think what's kept me quiet before is if I don't understand how policies are working, what the laws mean, who the decision makers are, just if I don't know information, it's much scarier to engage in these conversations. Building off of that, the idea of comfort with the advocacy process. Do you know who to talk to? Do you know where to go? That can be a huge hurdle to getting started and speaking out. And then finally, I really want to touch on the historical exclusion from decision making and government. So many of our families and our facilitators are groups that have been excluded from government, and they've been devalued by how we make decisions, and also feeling unsafe. I think for so many families, particularly immigrant and refugee families in our climate right now, government is not a safe place for people. And so how can we understand some of these issues and make opportunities that keep families feeling safe and empowering them to speak about their experiences? So just things to consider as moving forward, how you can be better prepared to create meaningful and fruitful opportunities for your families. So an exercise that I've done before that is hopefully just something to add to your toolkit of working with families. If you have caregivers who are interested or have expressed interest in speaking out or meeting with new people to talk about their vision, a little framework just to help people jot down their ideas on paper. Again, the more prepared people feel and the more knowledgeable you are, the better you're going to feel engaging in these new conversations. So even just checking in with your caregivers, what are our goals? And again, this goes back to our what's your cause conversation. What do you want to see in your community? Our goals are to have healthy kiddos who are eating nutritious meals and have a big support network of friends and family and are supported in our schools. If those are our goals, then asking ourselves who else cares about these goals. And clearly everyone in KPL is wrapped around this idea of community strength. How do we bring in people outside of KPL groups who might be engaging in these goals already, whether it is school boards or other organizations, and we'll get into government actors as well, but who else cares about these goals? Think about those decision makers. And then further thinking about who's actually making the decisions in your community that has a direct impact on your children and families. Let's see here. Yeah, I think just overall, what are our goals? My sub-question would be, what do we want to see changed or maintained in our community? And then who else cares about these goals? Thinking about that in terms of who can we join hands with to make change or to do advocacy with, whether that's community partners, neighbors, businesses. And then again, the question about who's making decisions in your community. Who do we need to talk to? And I think that's when I've framed, for myself at least, when I've framed advocacy in terms of there's this goal and this cause that I care about, who do I need to talk to get change on the decision-making agenda? And it's a process. We all learn different ways to engage in that advocacy, as we talked about already, but who do we need to talk to? I think that's a great way to frame that. So love to jump into a couple different ways that you could bring new opportunities into your KPL groups. I'm sorry, it looks like that picture is cutting off the bottom of the point there, but I'll tell you. One, just learning how to tell your story. As I mentioned earlier, we see it's so much easier to talk about your experience when you feel prepared. So even coming up with, I've had different groups that have had like a what is it, a 4x6 note card? They're 4x6 little note cards where we sit down for 10 minutes and write down who we are. And that's, I mean, your name, maybe what community you live in, your role. So maybe that's as a caregiver or it's as a facilitator for a KPL group. And then why you care. So saying, I mean, I care so deeply about early learning and family strengthening. I care because I've been a resident of this community for so long, and it's families thrive. My family thrives when we're connected with our community. And then sharing your experience and concerns. What things are you noticing today in your community and things that concern you? And then finally, changes that you want to see. So I don't think you have to have the perfect solution, but I think being able to express, like Kim was saying, whether that's having more bilingual services available to your kiddos, if these are things that aren't in your community and you want to see them, just having a chance to write these things down and feel like you can have a brief conversation of who I am, why I care, what my experience is, and then what those change could look like. Again, the more you practice, the easier it is to do in unfamiliar situations. So bringing something like this into KPL, if there's a way for part of your caregiver learning opportunities to work with caregivers during snack time or whatnot, to talk about how to develop your story and then practice with one another or work with your facilitators to just have those ready to go. So that's one fabulous way to bring advocacy in. Secondly, attending these local public events. I think if knowledge or time, again, is something that keeps a lot of people from being able to engage in advocacy, that's a way that facilitators and program coordinators can support their groups by identifying town halls, town hall meetings, school board meetings, and then neighborhood gatherings, and sharing those with families as they come through into the groups, of saying these are happening in the near future. Is that something that you're interested in? Joining hands with some other caregivers to go together, again, not doing it alone if that's scary, and joining with other caregivers to share their concerns in these more public spaces, and using the thing that we talked about previously, how to tell your story. Have your little note card with you when you go to these public events and share your story. Again, you don't have to have the perfect solution, but acknowledging concerns that you have and changes you want to see in your community. We're happy to help find local meetings, and KPL staff here at CCR are happy to get you in contact with those resources. But checking your city's website or calling school board members are great ways to just find out when meetings are happening. And again, if you print out these things too, having those in your resource binders on site, that's a great way to have things ready to go if people are interested in wanting to speak out in their communities. And next, talking about scheduling elected visitors. So again, if it's safe to do so, and the community that your KPL group is meeting in is one where having someone who works for the government come in is a safe and welcome space. It's a great way to again, bridge the big gap between families and government that we all feel, how to get someone to come and visit. So whether it doesn't need to be a state level representative, although you can see the bottom right picture here in Washington State, Patty Murray, our senator, used to be a preschool teacher. And so one of her favorite places to come and visit when she's in state is to go to different early learning and preschool programs. I mean, that's one idea, but there's so many other members who are invested in our families and communities, and inviting them to just come and see the families in their community. That's what they're elected to do, is to be able to speak and advocate on behalf of the communities that they serve. And what better way for them to understand than coming and seeing a KPL group in action and having parents talk to these people outside of a weird government office. Like, bring them into your KPL group. What a great way to just build off of the community that you already have. Let's see here. So there's, at the end of the webinar, there's a list of some resources that Kim's gonna explain briefly. And there's the National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC, has a website with different templates. So if inviting someone to your group sounds like a great idea and you just don't know where to start by reaching out, there's some really fabulous templates that you can change around to reflect the community that you serve and the name of your program. But having something like that makes it much easier to reach out and get someone to come visit. And then on that same note, the idea of having stencils for reaching out to your elected officials available to families as well. Decision makers, whether that's at the state level or even city council level, are available by email and phone year round, and they want to hear from the families in their communities. So learning how to use the telling your story and putting that into an email form, or even calling up your local official and talking about concerns that you have in your community and changes you want to see made. There's fabulous templates. Again, we'll have that in the resource slide, but things to share with families. Having those things printed out in a resource binder as well. If someone's has a issue in their community and they're really excited to talk about it and make change, say, hey, have you thought about sending an email or giving your city council member a call? Even just having the power of suggestion and having a stencil or template ready to go makes that a much easier process. The first point on the slide here, the subscribing to action alerts. So depending on where you are in the country, there are so many different child well-being organizations that they have people whose job is to keep track of what's happening in state government, national government, and so when bills get raised that impact kiddos or families, they are writing little bill summaries to explain what those pieces of legislation mean, and are also creating templates for families to use and send to their own elected officials and saying, hey, I see that there's this bill that could increase funding for early learning supports in Washington State, and as a caregiver, that's everything that I care about. So sending messages, having those action alerts from these organizations, let them do the hard work for you so you don't need to go read through thousands of pages of government documents, because nobody has time for that. So having them send you action alerts via email, or even helping families sign up for those action alerts if they're interested, and then providing stencils, like I said. Fabulous. So in wrapping up, I think the three main things I'd love to take away from this webinar is that advocacy is already happening in our communities and in our KPL groups. And learning to name it, I think, is the first step that is bringing power back to our quote at the beginning with the cat who sees itself as a lion. It's understanding the power that you have as a member who has lived experience of your community and what your families need to thrive. When you talk about it and educate people that you're sitting next to on the bus, or talking to family members or friends or partner organizations, you're already advocating for the change that you want to see. You're educating people and you're speaking out. And especially as KPL facilitators and program coordinators, you're in a space where you can make people who are showing up to your KPL groups aware of the power that they already have. And that's, again, this huge benefit to making the change, just seeing your space and your lived experience as power. And finally, as a facilitator and program coordinator, you can offer new ways for families to make change in their communities, like those 4 examples we talked about, creating those templates, finding opportunities in your community for families to attend, having templates available, working on telling your story. These are all great ways, and there are so many others that, of course, we would love to talk about, but could spend days talking about fabulous ideas for what to do in your particular group. So we have a few resources at the end we can go through and talk about what those might be able to provide. But again, this advocacy is already happening, and I think our goal here is to build off of the strengths that your communities already have to open up new opportunities. Use those community support and resource sharing networks that are built into your KPL programs as really great launching points to speak up and talk in your community about the change that you want to see.
All right, before I dig into the resources, I just want to acknowledge that Sue had sent a message earlier in the webinar saying that she wanted safety, good health, fairness, and trust for her community. And I think these are really wonderful things to want for your kids in your community. And the KPL setting and empowering caregivers to do this and those around you to speak up and to fight for these things, I think it's really inspirational. So we really encourage you to use the setting to foster this kind of activity and passion for what families want for their kids and their communities. If you ever want to actually have a conversation about advocacy in your group but need some assistance, I'm always happy to help visit and co-facilitate that or facilitate that. If you need some extra support, just let me know. Otherwise, here are some resources that we have for you on a little bit more materials on digging in deeper on this topic and some tools. So the National Council on Nonprofits has everyday advocacy resources for nonprofit leaders. They have what they call toolkits that are free and accessible. And no rush to write these all down. We'll send this PowerPoint to you via email after this ends, so you can have all of these at the ready. The National Association for the Education of Young Children that Camille mentioned earlier on has a sample invitation that you can use to contact an elected official. And they also have some crash course type resources available as well. And then there's also this great free online course you can take through Tech Change, and it's called The Art of Advocacy. And I kind of took a peek at it. I didn't do the whole thing, but it looks really promising. And that's really for more like higher level advocacy campaigns that some of those at the program level might be more interested in. And then lastly, we have more of a local resource through the Washington State Family and Community Engagement Trust website. And they have resources as well. And I just wanted to pause to see if anyone has any other questions. It looks like someone else has also said that momsrising.org is also a great website. And then the 023 national website also has advocacy resources as well. We have plenty of time for discussion and questions. So if any of you have any other comments, suggestions, maybe stories that you have from your groups or your organization about advocacy that you'd want to share with others to inspire people perhaps.
Or if you know of any other resources that you've seen in your community that have been used, that have been really helpful, we'd love to share those now, and we can send those out with the webinar PowerPoint too, so everyone can have those.
I also want to encourage you as well, if you have any caregivers interested in viewing this webinar, since it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, feel free to email them the link or to even watch it during a KPL group if they have some time, if you want to set some time for that, before or after group even. I think there was one group that had already told me that they plan to do that with their caregivers, and that was really cool.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. So we'll just give a few more minutes for people to chime in if they want.
Oh, that's a great point. I had someone mention getting out to vote. The idea of around election time, being able to support families and caregivers in whether that's registering to vote. There's some really great resources that we can send out again with the PowerPoint of getting things in different languages so people can read through different pieces of legislation, different candidates who are running, and then also having assistance at your KPL groups or in your resource binders to get people signed up to vote. That's a great way of building advocacy into the resources that you're sharing in KPL already.
And then even also setting time to talk to caregivers about registering to vote and making even like a field trip of it.
Yeah.
If you would also be really powerful also. If they're interested in that.
Bring your ballot to KPL Day.
Exactly, yes. And you can walk down the street together to submit your ballot. All right, anyone else? Okay, well, if you have, oh, someone has given us some feedback on this is wonderful, she says. Thank you, we appreciate it. If you have any more questions, you can always call or email us. I think all of you know how to get in contact with us pretty much by now. And Camille especially will be available to answer all your advocacy questions because she is the expert. Otherwise, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and we hope to see you all soon.